There was a time when science fiction promised us brighter cities, cleaner energy, and a future where technology quietly solved the problems we could not. But running parallel to that optimism was another vision, darker, more uncomfortable, and often dismissed as exaggerated pessimism. These films did not imagine tomorrow as a triumph. They imagined it as a mistake. The futures explored in this episode are not defined by wonder, but by failure. Not sudden apocalyptic endings, but slow collapses, shaped by bad decisions, misdirected innovation, and systems that outgrew the people they were meant to serve. Technology doesn't rebel in these worlds. It simply follows human intent to its logical conclusion. Societies fracture. Order becomes control. Survival replaces purpose. What makes these films unsettling is not how extreme they are, but how restrained they feel in hindsight. Many of them were released as action-driven entertainment, marketed with explosions, chases, and spectacle. Yet beneath that surface was a quiet warning progress. Without direction does not elevate humanity, it erodes it. These stories asked, what happens when efficiency replaces empathy, when security outweighs freedom, and when human value is measured only by utility? At the time, audiences often rejected these visions. They were called cynical ugly or unrealistic. Critics saw them as overreactions to Cold War anxiety, technological paranoia, or cultural pessimism. But decades later, those same futures feel disturbingly familiar. Surveillance is normalized. Data has become currency. Automation reshapes labor. Entire populations feel increasingly replaceable, monitored, or irrelevant. This episode looks back at 15 science fiction action films that imagined futures nobody wanted to see, and yet in many ways recognized long before we did. These are not perfect films, and they were never meant to be comforting. They are fractured warnings buried inside genre cinema, pointing toward outcomes that felt impossible, until they didn't. The question is no longer whether these films were too dark about tomorrow. The real question is whether we ignored them because they were too honest. 1. Johnny Mnemonic, 1995. Johnny Mnemonic envisions a future where information has become the most valuable commodity on Earth, and the human mind is the final storage device. Technology does not replace people, it invades them. Bodies become bandwidth. Identity becomes infrastructure. The film presents a society drowning in data, yet starving for meaning. Corporations control access to information, while disease, poverty, and social collapse spread unchecked. Knowledge exists in abundance, but wisdom is absent. Humanity is connected everywhere, yet grounded nowhere. What makes this future terrifying is how completely it commodifies the human being. Memory is no longer personal. Thought is no longer private. The brain becomes a container to be rented, upgraded, and discarded. Technology promises empowerment, but delivers dependency. At the time of its release, Johnny Mnemonic was criticized for excess and confusion. But viewed now, its vision feels prophetic. Information overload, digital identity, and corporate control over data have become defining features of modern life. In Johnny Mnemonic, tomorrow fails because humanity does not lose control of technology. It willingly merges with it until there is nothing left to separate the two. 2. Judge Dredd, 1995. Judge Dredd presents a future where justice has been simplified to the point of danger. Law is no longer interpreted, debated, or questioned. It is enforced instantly, without appeal by figures who embody authority itself. Efficiency replaces fairness. Speed replaces accountability. The film's world is shaped by fear of disorder. Crime is rampant, cities are overcrowded, and institutions respond by removing human judgment from the legal process. Judges are no longer servants of the law, they are the law. Individual lives are measured against rules, not context. What makes this future unsettling is its absolutism. Once discretion is eliminated, error becomes inevitable. Power concentrates into systems that cannot admit fault. The promise of safety masks the risk of irreversible injustice. Control becomes indistinguishable from tyranny. Released during a period of growing concern over crime and policing, Judge Dredd reflected anxieties about authority unchecked by empathy. Its future warns that when law becomes mechanical, morality becomes collateral damage. In this world, tomorrow fails because justice stops being human, and once that happens, it can no longer correct itself. 3. Demolition Man, 1993. Demolition Man imagines a future that believes it has solved violence by eliminating discomfort. Crime is gone, conflict is regulated, and language itself is sanitized. On the surface, society appears calm, safe, and efficient. But beneath that order lies a culture hollowed out by fear of risk, disagreement, and unpredictability. The film presents a world where control is exercised not through force, but through behavioral design. Citizens are conditioned to avoid offense, danger, and emotional extremes. Technology enforces compliance, quietly correcting behavior before it can become disruptive. Freedom is not banned. It is redesigned until it no longer resembles itself. What makes this future disturbing is how reasonable it sounds. Safety has become the highest moral value, outweighing creativity, dissent, and individuality. Human experience is flattened into something manageable. Passion is replaced by procedure. Progress is measured by stability rather than meaning. Released in the early 1990s, Demolition Man was often treated as satire. Yet its vision now feels closer to reality than parody. When society prioritizes comfort over autonomy, control does not feel oppressive, it feels responsible. In this world, tomorrow fails not because chaos wins, but because order becomes so perfect that humanity forgets what it gave up to achieve it. 4. Universal Soldier, 1992. Universal Soldier envisions a future where humanity solves the problem of loss by removing the cost of death. Soldiers are no longer mourned, they are recycled. Technology does not end war. It makes it more efficient by stripping combat of memory, identity, and consequence. The film presents a system where human beings are reduced to programmable assets. Individual history becomes irrelevant. Trauma is erased, not healed. The body remains, but the person is gone. What remains is obedience without reflection, strength without conscience. What makes this future unsettling is its practicality. There is no grand tyranny enforcing the system, only military logic taken to its extreme. War becomes cleaner, faster, and morally empty. Responsibility dissolves because no one involved is fully human anymore. Released after decades of technological militarization, Universal Soldier tapped into fears about automation and dehumanization. But its vision goes deeper. When humanity removes pain, memory, and identity from conflict, it does not become safer, it becomes detached from accountability. In this future, tomorrow fails because war no longer requires belief, sacrifice, or even awareness. Only functioning bodies inside a flawless machine. 5. The Puppet Masters, 1994. The Puppet Masters presents a future where invasion does not arrive through destruction, but through subtle integration. Control is not enforced with weapons, but through influence that goes unnoticed. Humanity does not fight back because it does not realize it has already been compromised. The film's central threat is not external power, but internal erosion. Parasitic forces do not overthrow institutions. They inhabit them. Individual autonomy dissolves quietly as behavior, loyalty, and decision-making are redirected from within. Freedom disappears not through conquest, but compliance. What makes this vision disturbing is how fragile human independence appears. The structures meant to protect society, governments, military systems, chains of command, become vulnerabilities rather than safeguards. Once influence replaces force, resistance becomes almost impossible to identify, let alone organize. At the time of its release, The Puppet Masters was often overshadowed by more explosive alien narratives. Yet its warning feels increasingly relevant. The greatest threat is not being ruled by an enemy, but becoming indistinguishable from one's own oppressor. In this future, tomorrow fails because humanity loses control without ever realizing when it happened. 6. Escape from New York, 1981. Escape from New York imagines a future where authority has not collapsed, but hardened into something punitive and indifferent. Society still functions, borders still exist, and order is officially maintained. But the concept of rehabilitation has vanished. Control replaces care. Fear replaces trust. The future is not lawless. It is excessively lawful. The film presents a world where social failure is no longer addressed, only contained. Crime is not reduced, only isolated. Entire populations are discarded into zones of permanent abandonment, removed from public consciousness. The state does not fix problems. It hides them behind walls and calls it stability. What makes this vision unsettling is how rational it feels within the system that enforces it. The prison city is treated as a logical solution, not a moral failure. Human life inside it loses political value. Survival becomes personal because society has already written these people off as expendable. Released in the early 1980s, Escape from New York reflected fears about rising crime and authoritarian responses. But viewed today, its future feels less extreme. It suggests a world where efficiency overrides responsibility and where control is mistaken for order. In this future, tomorrow fails. Because society does not collapse, it abandons parts of itself and continues as if nothing was lost. 7. Road Warrior, 1981. Road Warrior imagines a future where society has collapsed into pure competition over resources. Law, identity, and morality have been stripped away, replaced by survival hierarchies enforced through violence. Civilization has not disappeared. It has simplified itself down to fuel territory and force. The film's world operates on a single principle: scarcity defines value. Communities form not around shared ideals, but around protection and control of resources. Trust is temporary. Alliances exist only as long as they are useful. Human life is expendable when weighed against survival. What makes this future chilling is its efficiency. There is no illusion of rebuilding institutions or restoring order. Violence is not chaotic, it is strategic. The strongest systems are the most ruthless ones. Civilization adapts by abandoning empathy, not by preserving it. Released during a period of economic instability and energy anxiety, Road Warrior captured fears about resource dependency and societal breakdown. Its future feels less like fantasy and more like extrapolation. When resources vanish, ideology follows. In Road Warrior, tomorrow fails not because humanity loses its tools, but because it reorganizes itself around the idea that only the strongest deserve to exist. 8. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. A Boy and His Dog presents one of the most brutally honest post-apocalyptic futures in science fiction. Civilization has not merely fallen, it has inverted. Social order exists, but it is grotesque, exploitative, and stripped of moral coherence. Humanity has rebuilt itself around instinct rather than ethics. The surface world is violent, transactional, and driven by immediate gratification. Underground societies claim refinement and structure, yet hide authoritarian control beneath the appearance of order. Neither represents progress. Both are distorted responses to collapse shaped by fear, control, and desperation rather than vision. What makes this future deeply unsettling is how casually it treats cruelty. Exploitation is not shocking. It is expected. Power dynamics are accepted without question, and survival is prioritized over dignity. Intelligence exists, but it is detached from compassion. The film offers no illusion that rebuilding automatically leads to improvement. At the time of its release, A Boy and His Dog was controversial, often misunderstood as provocation rather than warning. But its future feels disturbingly plausible. When systems fail completely, humanity does not necessarily become wiser, it becomes more honest about its impulses. In this world, tomorrow fails, because civilization returns, but without conscience. Progress is not reversed, it is corrupted. 9. Damnation Alley, 1977. Damnation. Alley envisions a future that technically survives catastrophe, yet never truly escapes it. Nuclear devastation has passed, but the world left behind is stripped of direction, meaning, and any sense of renewal. Survival is no longer a stepping stone toward rebuilding, it is the destination itself. Humanity moves forward, but without a clear reason why. The film's future is defined by scarcity and motion. Small groups travel through hostile landscapes, not to reclaim civilization, but simply to avoid extinction. Technology still exists, but it has been reduced to maintenance rather than progress. Machines keep people alive, but they no longer point toward anything better. The idea of a shared future has vanished. What makes this vision unsettling is its emotional emptiness. There is no ideological struggle, no hope of restoration. The catastrophe did not produce a new order. It produced inertia. People persist because stopping would mean death, not because life holds promise. The world continues out of habit rather than purpose. Released in the late 1970s, Damnation Alley reflected growing unease about nuclear escalation and environmental collapse. Yet its most disturbing idea is not destruction, but aftermath. It suggests that the real failure of tomorrow is not annihilation, but endurance without meaning. In this future, humanity survives the end of the world, only to discover that survival alone is not enough to build one. 10. The Final Countdown, 1980. The Final Countdown presents one of the most restrained visions of a failed future. A moment where humanity is given the power to change history and chooses not to. Advanced technology does not corrupt or destroy civilization. Instead, it paralyzes it, revealing how unprepared humanity is to wield true influence over its own destiny. The film places modern military power face to face, with the past creating an ethical standstill. The future possesses overwhelming advantage, yet lacks the moral clarity to act. Knowledge of what is coming does not empower intervention. It creates hesitation. Responsibility becomes too large to manage. What makes this future unsettling is its restraint. The failure is not technological, but philosophical. Humanity has built machines capable of altering the course of history, yet remains bound by fear, uncertainty, and institutional caution. Power exists, but wisdom does not scale with it. Released at the dawn of a new technological era, The Final Countdown reflects anxiety about authority without guidance. The future is not denied. It is deferred again and again until opportunity disappears. Progress stalls under the weight of its own consequences. In The Final Countdown, tomorrow fails. Not because humanity cannot change the future, but because it cannot agree on whether it should. 11. The Philadelphia Experiment, 1984. The Philadelphia Experiment imagines a future born from secrecy rather than collapse. The world appears stable on the surface, but it is shaped by technologies developed beyond ethical oversight, hidden inside military ambition. Progress moves forward without public consent, and human beings become test variables rather than participants in their own future. The film's central premise is not time travel, but loss of control. Scientific advancement outruns understanding, and the consequences are absorbed by individuals who never agreed to bear them. The future emerges unevenly advanced, in capability primitive in accountability. Technology works, but nobody truly knows how or at what cost. What makes this vision unsettling is the absence of malice. No villain seeks domination. Instead, institutional momentum pushes experimentation forward, even when the human consequences are catastrophic. Lives are altered, erased, or displaced, not out of cruelty, but efficiency. Responsibility dissolves inside classified decisions. At the time of its release, the film tapped into Cold War fears of secret weapons and hidden experiments. But viewed now, it reads as a warning about innovation without transparency. When progress is detached from public understanding, society loses the ability to consent or to resist. In the Philadelphia experiment tomorrow fails because knowledge advances faster than ethics, leaving humanity trapped inside systems it never chose to build. 12. Cherry 2000, 1987. Cherry 2000 presents a future where civilization has not collapsed outright, but has quietly rewired itself around convenience and emotional avoidance. Technology has not enslaved humanity through force. It has done so by offering something easier than human connection. Relationships still exist, but they are fragile, inefficient, and ultimately optional. Artificial replacements are cleaner, safer, and more predictable. In this world, intimacy is regulated, mediated, and increasingly outsourced. Emotional risk is treated as a flaw rather than a necessity. The titular android is not terrifying because she is artificial, but because she represents a cultural decision that companionship should be programmable, controllable, and disposable. Love becomes a product with specifications, warranties, and upgrade paths. What makes this future disturbing is how normalized the exchange feels. Human bonds are not forbidden, they are simply inconvenient. The more advanced technology becomes, the less patience society has for emotional complexity. Imperfection is no longer tolerated when a flawless substitute is available. Humanity does not disappear, it becomes optional. Released in the late 1980s, Cherry 2000 was often treated as quirky genre fiction. Yet its core idea has aged uncomfortably well. The film imagines a future where loneliness is not solved, only anesthetized. Technology fills the gap left by eroded social structures, but never replaces what was lost. In Cherry 2000, tomorrow fails. Not because machines overpower humanity, but because humanity willingly steps aside, choosing predictability over connection. 13. Cyborg 1989. Cyborg presents a future where the world has technically survived, but nothing meaningful has been preserved. Civilization has collapsed, yet the machinery of progress continues to move forward without purpose. Technology still exists, but stripped of optimism, functioning only as a tool to prolong decay rather than reverse it. The film's landscape is empty, brutal, and transactional. Survival is the only currency, and morality has become a liability. Human connection has no structural support because the systems that once protected it are gone. What remains is motion without direction, people moving through ruins, chasing fragments of hope that may no longer matter. At the center of this future is technology that was once meant to save humanity. Information, medical knowledge, and artificial intelligence are treated as the last lifelines of a dying species. Yet even these tools are reduced to objects to be fought over, traded, or destroyed. The promise of salvation exists, but the world has lost the capacity to rebuild itself long enough to use it. What makes Cyborg unsettling is how indifferent the future feels. There is no grand villain shaping events, no ideological war. Violence is casual, almost administrative. Human beings are hunted not for power or domination, but for utility. Life has become expendable because there is no framework left to justify preserving it. Released during the late Cold War era, the film reflected anxieties about technological dependence without ethical responsibility. But unlike more elaborate dystopias, Cyborg strips the idea down to its bones. When systems fail completely, technology does not elevate humanity, it isolates it. Knowledge alone is not enough. Without shared values, progress becomes meaningless data drifting through ruins. In Cyborg, tomorrow fails quietly. Not in explosions or speeches, but in the simple realization that survival by itself is no longer a victory. 14. Dark Angel, I Come in Peace, 1990. Dark Angel imagines a future that has not collapsed into chaos, but quietly rotted from the inside. The world still functions, cities still stand, and law enforcement still exists. But everything is thinner, more desperate, and fundamentally compromised. Crime is no longer local or even human. It has become an ecosystem, fed by addiction, profit, and indifference, operating on a global scale that no institution can truly control. The film presents a society where violence is no longer shocking, because it is no longer exceptional. Police are outmatched, under-resourced, and forced into reactive roles rather than preventative ones. The arrival of an extraterrestrial drug dealer does not disrupt the system, it exposes how perfectly the system is already designed for exploitation. Addiction is simply another market. Bodies are just another resource. What makes this future disturbing is its familiarity. There is no singular apocalypse, no moral turning point. Instead, the world has adapted to decay. Technology has improved surveillance and firepower, but not justice. Systems react faster, but they do not think deeper. The line between criminal enterprise and survival has blurred so thoroughly that profit becomes the only consistent logic. The alien threat at the center of the story is almost incidental. The real horror is that humanity has already built the conditions that allow such a predator to thrive. A society driven by consumption dependency and desperation does not need to be conquered, it only needs to be accessed. Control is no longer enforced through ideology, but through supply and demand. Released at the dawn of the 1990s, Dark Angel was often dismissed as a genre hybrid part, sci-fi part, action thriller. But viewed now, its vision feels less like exaggeration and more like early diagnosis. It portrays a future where the greatest danger is not invasion, but normalization. Evil no longer arrives dramatically. It blends in, does business, and leaves the system intact. In this world, tomorrow fails not because order disappears, but because it continues working exactly as designed. 15. Wing Commander, 1999. At first glance, Wing Commander looks like a familiar science fiction war story, humanity locked in a desperate interstellar conflict, pilots thrown into impossible battles, survival measured in seconds. But beneath its space combat and military spectacle is a far more pessimistic vision of the future, one where progress has not unified humanity, but streamlined it into a machine built solely for conflict. The film presents a future in which technological advancement has been shaped almost entirely by warfare. Faster ships, smarter navigation systems, and genetically enhanced pilots are not symbols of exploration or discovery. They exist for one reason only: efficiency in killing. Human beings are no longer defined by curiosity or creativity, but by how effectively they can serve a battlefield that never ends. Even identity becomes conditional, tied to usefulness rather than individuality. What makes this vision unsettling is how normalized it feels within the world of the film. There is no grand debate about whether humanity should be fighting across the stars. The war is simply accepted as permanent. Strategy replaces morality. Sacrifice becomes routine. Loss is processed quickly because hesitation is a liability. The future does not collapse in flames, it stabilizes into something colder, more efficient, and emotionally hollow. Technology in this context does not turn against humanity. It does something worse. It reshapes humanity to fit its needs. Enhanced reflexes, altered genetics, and accelerated decision-making are celebrated, but they come at the cost of empathy and doubt. Pilots are valued less as people and more as components in a system that cannot afford hesitation. The human body itself becomes another upgrade path. Released at the end of the 1990s, Wing Commander arrived during a period when digital warfare, remote combat, and data-driven strategy were rapidly redefining real-world militaries. At the time, its bleak implications were largely overlooked, buried beneath its action-heavy presentation. Yet in retrospect, its future feels uncomfortably close. A world where conflict is perpetual, technology accelerates faster than ethics, and survival depends on adapting to systems that no longer ask whether they should exist. In Wing Commander, tomorrow does not belong to explorers or visionaries. It belongs to those who can function fastest inside a machine that never stops. These films were never meant to predict the future perfectly. They were meant to ask uncomfortable questions at a time when optimism was easier than doubt. Looking back now, what makes them unsettling is not how wrong they were, but how close many of their fears came to reality. Failed systems, misdirected technology, and societies that traded meaning for efficiency were not sudden disasters, they were gradual choices. The futures in this episode did not collapse overnight. They drifted, step by step, compromise by compromise, until what remained no longer felt like progress at all. And that raises a difficult question. If these warnings were visible decades ago, why were they so easy to ignore? Perhaps the real failure was never technological, but human. A belief that advancement alone would save us without asking where it was leading. Which of these films do you think came closest to the world we are living in now? And more importantly, do you see these futures as exaggerations or as paths we are still quietly following?